Often with urban legends, there's the story and then there's the truth. But sometimes a legend is based on a grain of truth. It gets confusing. Like so many other areas of the country, Fairfax, Virginia has its own mythological celebrity. And this one's a little fuzzy. Now, I mean, what could be more gentle, warm, and cuddly than a bunny? Am I right? Well, think again. Because if we've learned nothing from Monty Python, it's that sometimes those rabbits are dynamite. This is extremely strange. For over 40 years, the legend of the Bunnyman has captured the imaginations of storytellers, internet sleuths, and thrill-seeking teenagers from its home borough in northern Virginia to fields and meadows all over the country. And like a lot of urban legends, if you tempt fate and stick to the easy-to-follow directions, you can actually summon him and hopefully live to tell the tale. That's T-A-L-E. Moving on. Like many contemporary urban legends flooding the web, the origins of the Bunnyman begin in the 1970s, a time when Nixon and mind-altering drugs were considered one and the same. In order to lay eyes on this paranormal puka, let's set our coordinates for the Colchester Overpass in Clifton, Virginia, which to locals is more infamously known as the Bunnyman Bridge, which, perhaps to no one's surprise, is actually named for an alleged serial killer. But let's first venture back to the 1970s, when a student at the University of Maryland named Patricia Johnson wrote a paper on the Bunnyman legend, wherein she interviewed 33 fellow students about the legend, which led to 54 different versions of the story. Now, there were some common denominators in the story, which basically revolved around people in cars being attacked, a rabbit suit, and an axe. Your basic grindhouse movie tropes. Sound pretty far-fetched? Well, it turns out it isn't. Not really. On October 8, 1970, in Burke, Virginia, Air Force Academy cadet Robert Bennett told police that one night, in an otherwise deserted area near his uncle's house, a man wearing a white bunny suit approached his car and began screaming at he and his fiancée, claiming they were parked on private property and that he had taken down their license plate number. As if that wasn't enough to spoil the mood, the bunny then threw the hatchet he was carrying through the windshield of their car and, quote, skipped off into some nearby bushes. Neither the cadet or his fiancée was hurt, but when they reported the attack to authorities, they also produced the hatchet as evidence. With the weapon now in hand, it was time to hunt down the bombastic bunny. Now, it should be noted that though 40 years have passed since the incident, the couple, now married, still maintains that it actually happened, as does the aunt who helped pull glass out of the fiancé's hair that night. It wasn't long before the Bunnyman struck again, when a construction company security guard named Paul Phillips watched a man in a rabbit suit chop away on the front column of a brand new yet unoccupied home he was watching over. When the rampaging rabbit noticed the guard, he yelled something about all the people trespassing around here, while ignoring Phillips' attempts to reason with him, and threatening to bash his head in. Phillips then went to his vehicle to get his handgun, but by the time he returned, the elusive Bunnyman had fled. No one remembers seeing the Bunnyman after that episode, but someone who identified himself only as the Axeman did call a local construction company to vehemently complain about debris on his property. Now, maybe this was an irate landowner who went to extreme measures to chase away interlopers and developers, going so far as to wear a bunny suit. But there is another version of this story, and it's much more gruesome, if that's your kind of thing. Hey, no judgments here, weirdo. Legend has it that in the early 20th century, an insane asylum,
now we're talking,
was located between Clifton and Fairfax Station. Locals there, not catering to the idea of such a place located so close to their small town of 300 or so inhabitants, petitioned for its closure and relocation, and their wish was eventually granted. And so the residents of the asylum were loaded into a bus to be transported to nearby Lorton Prison. En route, the driver lost control of the vehicle when he swerved to avoid something in the road and crashed the bus, allowing many of the passengers to make their escape. Within a few months, all were eventually caught, except for one, Douglas Griffin. A manhunt for the escaped lunatic ensued, but all police found was a bloody trail of half-eaten rabbits, with a number of them hanging from what was then called the Fairfax Station Bridge. After months of exhaustive search, Griffin was never found. Then, on Halloween night 1905, a group of teenagers were hanging out under the bridge. While many eventually went home, 3 of them, 2 males and a female, decided to remain there. When the clock struck midnight, the 3 were swiftly and brutally attacked, murdered, disemboweled, and left hanging from opposite ends of the bridge, just like the rabbits found during the search for Griffin.
Now, a variation of the story says there were actually 2 convicts, one named Marcus Walster, who was found hung from the bridge that night with a note attached to him signed, "The Bunnyman." The other escapee, Griffin, who would leave the trail of bunny carcasses, was eventually hunted down and cornered by police, but in an effort to escape, was hit by a passing train before he could be charged with any crime. So now the whole thing changes with 2 convicts instead of just 1. But we're splitting hairs here. But the tale, okay, I'll stop now, took an even more sinister turn. And from here on in, it gets even sillier. So just know that going in.
It's now 1906, Halloween night, with the events that occurred 1 year earlier still fresh in everyone's minds. Tempting fate, 7 teenagers decided to journey to the bridge to either dispel the story of the Bunnyman or confront it to establish some street cred, or whatever the equivalent of that was called back then. At midnight, 6 of the youths stayed inside the bridge, while one, a young lady named Adrian Hatala, kept her distance should she decide to make a break for it if the Bunnyman appeared on schedule. When midnight struck, she claimed to have witnessed a faint light approaching on the railroad track above the bridge, and then saw a brilliant flash of light inside the bridge. It was then she heard the anguished screams of her friends inside the tunnel, and no more than 5 seconds later, saw their corpses hanging from the bridge in the same manner as the others were a year before. The terrified Adrian ran home as fast as her legs could carry her, with the Bunnyman in hot pursuit. When she managed to make it back to town, stricken with fear, she could barely tell her story coherently, and it didn't matter anyway as no one believed a word of it. Until the bodies were discovered, upon which poor Adrian was charged with the murder and sent away to Lorton Prison. 7 years passed without incident until Halloween night of 1913, when, with the idea of an anniversary killer on the loose not yet sinking in, 9 more teenagers were slaughtered in the same manner. The only one reaping the benefits of this latest slaughter was Adrian Hatala, who was still incarcerated at that time. Because of the latest slayings, she was given a "my bad" from authorities, who now believed her and decided to release her. It was too late, however, as her time in prison had resulted in her going quite mad and unable to assimilate back into society. She therefore remained in the asylum until her death in 1953. Cause of death? Succumbing to shock. From what? No one actually knows, but it's been surmised the Bunnyman had visited her in her dreams and literally frightened her to death. Finally understanding that the bridge was to be avoided at all costs on Halloween, The Bunnyman claimed no other victims until 1943, when 6 teenagers were massacred and hung from the bridge, yada yada yada. After another few decades of avoidance, the Bunnyman, who by now was well into his 90s, was physically capable of taking only 3 more lives on Halloween of 1976. By the 1980s, the legend of the Bunnyman shifted into overdrive, especially during the decade's Satanic Panic period, and his reign of terror was said to have spread to Maryland and the District of Columbia. In 1987, Janet Charlatier was driving around with 4 of her friends on Halloween night. By 11 p.m., they were at the Bunnyman Bridge, poised and ready for whatever horrors might await them. None believed in the legend and were anxious to go back and tell everyone they'd beat the system. To pass the time before their inevitable murders, they took turns scaring each other, which worked poor Janet up a little too much. And by the time the clock struck midnight, she was literally beside herself with fear. Running out of the bridge, she saw the white light of doom, and just as she exited, watched in horror as the flesh on her chest began to peel away as if being torn. She then ran smack into a hanging body, which knocked her unconscious. When she awoken, she found her hair had turned completely white, and she'd been cut. Janet then left the bridge, never to return. But it's said to this day, passers-by see her sitting on a porch swing each morning at her home, staring off in the direction of the Bunnyman Bridge.
And it's all true. Okay, I can't say that with a straight face.
Like a modern-day boogeyman, Bunnyman was said to target disobedient children and slaughter local animals. People took the stories quite seriously and began to research local murders to find some connection to an actual flesh and blood killer. When the internet gained traction in the 1990s, stories of the Bunnyman were spread far and wide, actually predating his other murderous brethren like Slender Man, the Rake, and the ubiquitous Hat Man. But what truly brought the masses a-running was an episode of the Fox Network's Scariest Places on Earth, where a segment called Terror on Bunnyman's Bridge was shown.
Hey, if you can't believe Linda Blair, who can you believe?
The Bunnyman has lived a long life, mainly because his story has been used in a number of shock and slash films, like Bunnyman, Bunnyman Massacre, Bunnyman Vengeance, and because the first 3 apparently left so many unanswered questions, the Bunnyman Resurrection. And the character of Frank, who often appeared in a Bunnyman suit in the film Donnie Darko, is said to be patterned after the original hair raiser himself. And the ultimate tribute to any serial killer, a beer named after you.
Now, it's never fun to bring sanity to any good story, but here are some inconvenient facts for your consideration.
There actually was a grumpy, territorial old man who lived on an adjacent property to the one the cadet and his fiancée were accosted in 1970, but he had died 2 years prior to the incident. The assailant was reportedly in his 20s, so perhaps a younger relative took up the cause for him, who knows. The crime also made the local television news as being quite credible. The security guard for the construction company's report has been deemed accurate, and it does adhere to the same grievance of trespassing. So we'll put that one also in the credible category. The Axeman, who complained about his property being infringed upon by a construction company, did make a call to them about his issue and encouraged a meeting to work things out, but never showed up at the appointed time, and the whole thing was forgotten. There was no record of an asylum existing in Fairfax County during the reported time period, and Lorton Prison didn't exist until 1910. No names of inmates named Griffin or Walster appeared in court records during that period. Through research, it was discovered from the years 1887 to 1973, there were 550 individual mentions of murder in the Fairfax County area. Of those, only 3 involved multiple murders or children, They took place in 1918, 1927, and 1949. None fit the profile of anyone wearing a bunny suit, and of those, 2 killers were caught, and the only one designated as unsolved occurred after the Bunnyman made his first appearance. But that one didn't involve multiple victims. Yet the legend of the Bunnyman lives on, with people, mostly teenagers and thrill seekers, holding firm that something strange took place there, and that at the stroke of midnight on Halloween, there is always the chance that the Bunnyman will return.
And if you're not careful, you may encounter the same fate as teenagers and dead rabbits of days gone by. Bunnyman, Bunnyman, Bunnyman. Nothing.